Welcome back to Second Helping, the show of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. It is May the 10th, 2024. I'm Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, part of the On3 network, alongside my great friend and co-host, Brent Beaird, longtime college football analyst there at First Coast News in Jacksonville, Florida. Of course, Brent, also a voter for the most prestigious individual honor in collegiate sports, the Heisman Trophy. Now, Brent, first and foremost, we need a magazine update. I know the
Yeah,
countdown
absolutely.
is on. Before we talk about Brian Kelly's comments on NIL, before we get into some back-to-back scenarios for 5 or 6 of the SEC teams looking ahead to the 2024 season, and a plethora of news and notes from Brent's notebook that we're going to have later, we need the magazine countdown update. Where are
Absolutely.
we at, Brent?
Yeah, we are probably less than 2 weeks away now. And the reason I give you that is I wrote on my calendar that the magazines came out last year around the 23rd of May. So that lends us to believe that that might happen again. But look, you and I've done a magazine together, certainly writing. And what I know you can appreciate, Trav, if you're getting a magazine out in 2 weeks, that means the portal closed last week. There were a few days after that, and then you got a deadline, probably what, of last weekend, if you want to get it out within 2 weeks. Now I know they had some of that work done, but the problem with the portal nowadays is how difficult it is in writing a magazine, particularly when you're on deadline on what to do. So we're looking at less than a couple of weeks. Phil Steele has said his will be out before July the 4th, and it would be obviously more accurate because he had some time. But I feel for the guys at Lindy's and Athlon, frankly.
Yeah, I was in that magazine scenario about 30 years ago. If there had been a transfer portals, windows back then, I doubt I would have taken that on. So,
Yeah, yeah.
thoughts and prayers to Phil Still and
Boy,
others who
really.
continue to grind out hard copy for us where those preseason annuals are concerned. Hey, Brent, again, we've got a lot to get into on today's program, and I figured no better place to start than with some needle moving comments from Brian Kelly. He'll do that from time to
He
time, the
will.
LSU
He
head
will.
coach, and talking with Jacques Duquet. And by the way, if there's a sportscaster in the state of Louisiana,
Really?
his name should be Jacques Duquet. I
That's
mean, you
right.
you couldn't
Yes.
come up with that for a Gil Thorpe cartoon strip. Look that up. I'm dating myself now with cartoon strips, newspaper cartoons. Um, but interesting nonetheless, because as we heard from Brian Kelly, he's not in the market, he says, for buying players. In his quote, unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. Now, look, it's been a little bit of a rough stretch for LSU in the
It
portal,
has.
especially where defensive linemen are concerned. And I think part of this for Brian Kelly probably goes back to we brought in Bo Davis. I mean, if you want to
Yes.
go somewhere where you can be developed by a guy that has sent perhaps dozens of defensive linemen to the National Football League, whether it's most recently at Texas, whether it was previously at the University of Alabama and some other stops, then this is a great sort of layover spot for you to be able to do that as a transfer portal target. But the Tigers have largely whiffed in that area. And when you think about the schools that they have lost out to on some of these targets, we do know NIL is a very big thing for the Miamis and the Oregons and some of these places. So, some frustration, I think, coming to the surface here for Brian Kelly. But I also think he's being genuine in his approach and the approach of some other places and some other elite coaches not named Ohio State and Ryan Day. So just wanted your thoughts on the look of those comments and what your sort of translation of them was.
The LSU beat writers will tell you very quickly that LSU will again be very good offensively. And what's fascinating with this, Trav, is they've got one of the better offensive lines in the SEC.
Yeah, they do.
But the defensive line is yet to be another story. Now, I'm with you on Bo Davis. It's about to get a lot better, and there's probably no one better than bringing in talent, and particularly high school talent, as we've seen before, on what Bo Davis can do. But look, you've seen this to me all week long from different coaches who are basically saying in some form or fashion the same thing. I mean, we saw kind of the same thing that didn't we, Trav, with Hugh Freeze when he was asked, and I believe
About the quarterback position.
Yes, about the quarterback position. We feel good about our quarterback room. We didn't think it was necessary to go out and spend $1 million in order to get a quarterback.
And I don't think he's just talking about, by the way, portal targets. I think he's talking about high school targets out there.
Yes.
You've got guys like Julian Lewis of Carrollton, Georgia, setting some trips. He's a USC commitment right now, but I don't think it's a secret on the recruiting trail that Julian Lewis, like so many other young players and prospects, and more power to them. This is what the players and prospects have in terms of leverage right now, trying to maximize that angle with this thing. So
yes, and Trav, let me get your take on this too. What I have heard this week is now look, to get a quarterback is always probably priority one. Well, 1A, from what I've heard all week long from coaches and media, is how difficult it is now to get really tremendous defensive linemen. That position, as particularly a pass rusher, has become so important now to where coaches are looking high and low, even internationally, just to be able to get some guys who can do that. So, part of this, is it not, because the game's changed a little bit?
Well, defensive line has been a premium regardless of the eras. You need people that can stop the run. You need people that can also rush the passer. So it kind of covers a broad spectrum when you're talking about the defensive line position. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of this stems, what we're hearing here from Brian Kelly and maybe some others, involves the defensive line.
Yeah.
At LSU, historically, you think of elite defensive line players, Glenn Dorsey, guys like that, going back throughout the years, Booger McFarland, those type of players. And right now, LSU just does not have them, and just sent 3 guys to the National Football League. I think that was part of Brian Kelly's point in all of this. If you want to be groomed and prepared for a long career in the NFL, then we're for you. The other side of that too is in the later portal, like this one, guys have even greater leverage if they are legit high-end players, because this is the last stop. This is like being on 301 back in the day in the state of Florida. And you knew that this orange juice stand or this Stuckey's coming up was it before you got to Ocala or Orlando or one of those places. And you had better hit the restroom, or you better had get your snack or your drink, because it was going to be a long road. There wasn't going to be many options until you got to your destination down the road. And I think that's where LSU's at right now.
Oh, yeah.
And this is kind of last stop situation for defensive linemen. And some of these defensive linemen that we've seen make moves from Michigan State and some other programs, if we're being honest, these aren't Lombardi Trophy award winners. These aren't first team All-Americans, but it's the right time at the right position for these guys. And so you're hearing some numbers well into the 7 figures for 1 year.
Amazing. Oh,
and, I think also when you think about Brian Kelly and some of the other elite coaches, maybe even Kirby Smart, Lincoln Riley, guys like this, they're still having a hard time wrapping their heads around, I'm not a good enough coach. We're not a good enough program for you to come here and play and develop. And from what I'm gathering, some of these official visits, even at those places, they could really just be 6 hours. They don't
Yeah,
need to be a weekend, because a
sure.
lot of these guys, because they have the leverage, they just want to know what's the offer. It's simply that.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my number. Who can
Mm-hmm.
get the closest or hit it?
Yep. Yep.
Throw in a few other things maybe, and I'll be off to you and I'll play for you in 2024. And I think some ego comes into this too with some of these guys like Kelly and others, because the sense has always been that they've been good enough. Their track
Mm-hmm.
record speaks for
Mm-hmm.
itself. But the reality of this situation right now is that guys, especially at premium positions like defensive line, know they have the hammer and they are absolutely using it.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And now look, they do have some talent. Jacobian Guillory is probably going to be one of their guys. I've got a transfer from Florida and Jalen Lee. But to your point, they've also got some converted offensive linemen who are going to try the defensive line. Dominic
It usually
McKinley.
doesn't go that way, by the way. You
You're
usually
right.
don't go
You're
offense to
right.
defense. Usually you
Yeah.
go defense to offense. So
Oh yeah.
that's not a promising scenario usually, right,
Yeah,
Brent?
yeah, I agree. And they missed out on a couple of guys, Dominic Williams and Simeon Barrow. You mentioned the Michigan State guy who went to Miami with that too. But I think, and my last thing on this would be, Trev, the pressure to me is coming from this fan base that set through some very average to abysmal defensive performances last year, knowing that side of the ball has got to be shored up at some point.
Yeah, Bo Davis can't play too.
No,
As
no.
good a coach as he is, Bo's out of eligibility. Bo was
Mhm.
pretty much a first down guy even when he did play. Um,
Yeah.
so that's kind of where you're at if you're LSU. And again, it's just interesting to see how NIL is being embraced and received by different coaches. We had the region's
Mhm.
tradition celebrity pro am in Birmingham this week. And, you had your guys like Hugh Freeze, Kirby Smart, Nick Saban continuing to appear at the Celebrity Pro Am. And pretty much those guys had on their school issued regalia,
Yeah.
the angry G or the
Yeah.
Georgia
Right.
logo. You know what Kalen DeBoer had on his logo on his shirt was Yay Alabama, the collective
That's right.
for
Yeah.
Alabama. So it kind of gives you an idea of maybe who's saying, okay,
Mhm.
we're ready to play that game. But here's the thing too, even places like Alabama with Yay Alabama and Georgia and SC, they don't have right now the coffers in their collectives as
Mm-mm.
deep as
Mm-mm.
I think some of these guys on the market think. I think the
Right.
perception is, well, they got 20, 30 million bucks ready to
Yeah.
go right now. It doesn't mean that those places can't access that in time,
Mhm.
but with this filling out process that's still going on, they don't have it readily available right now. I'm not
Right.
trying to poor mouth these programs and try to convince you that they're poor or broke. Obviously, they are not. But in terms of just their collectives and how they're set up. So when a guy and or his agency comes through and asks for something well into the seven figures, based on how a lot of these are set up right now, they're essentially asking for all of the collective, because
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
what
Yes.
exists right now. Now
Oh,
we'll
yeah.
see those beef up, but I think schools and programs too, Brent, are still again trying to see how this is all going to play out in terms of regulation. Do you want to go overboard and overcommit, and then you try to go back? That makes a tough scenario with some of these folks that you're dealing with. So, just again, crazy, crazy times.
Well, and two, uh, uh, donor fatigue is real.
It is.
And What's interesting is University of Alabama basketball and others are going to be playing in Las Vegas in an
Yeah.
NIL-driven situation that the winner gets a certain amount of money that at that point doesn't involve donor fatigue and travel. I wonder if we're going to see a lot more of that coming up in the next few
And
months.
that's essentially revenue sharing is what we're
It is,
seeing
isn't it?
go into play there. And I think we are. I think essentially what we're going to see is more and more models that align with revenue sharing.
Yes.
I mean, whatever that event is paying those schools to participate in that players era fest that you referred to on the
Mhm.
basketball court out in Vegas, uh, they're sharing the revenue
Sure.
with the players in that. That's basically what's going to happen in that situation. So some interesting comments from Brian Kelly. You know what else we've got coming up this season, Brent? Boy, with Oklahoma and Texas coming into the Southeastern Conference, some very interesting back to backs when we talk about consecutive game scenarios for teams around the SEC. And what we're going to do over these next three shows is sort of break those down 5 or 6 teams at a time. 16 teams in the league now. We would be on here for a couple hours probably going
Yeah.
throughout the
Yeah.
entire league. And we got some really good news and notes we want to get to with Brent coming up as well. So, what we'll do today is we'll start with 6 teams and we'll do this alphabetically. So, with that, we start with Alabama in some back to back scenarios. And really, right off the bat, you get into it with some of these teams, including Alabama, because you've got the trip to Wisconsin for Alabama in week 2. Now, you've also got some bye week scenarios too that you have to take into account with some of these. You look at Alabama into the month of October with Tennessee and Missouri back to back. That could certainly be
Yeah.
interesting as well. You've got then from that Missouri game, you've got another matchup with LSU on the road for Alabama. Now, again, buys play into this between Missouri and LSU for Alabama is a bye week. And there are a lot of years, if I told you, Alabama's going to go to Oklahoma in late November and then host
Yeah.
the Iron Bowl the next week. That would probably be a back to back that catches your eye.
Oh yeah, yeah, no doubt about it. The buys are incredible in a lot of ways. But I tell you what, look, to me they've got a better roster. Alabama does than Wisconsin. That could be close. It's on the road. Frankly, as they're still trying to figure themselves out. But the bye helps them, I think, to get mentally ready for Georgia as much as it is anything else. But I'll say this, and this is something you brought to my attention over the last 2 or 3 years. This Missouri situation is no gimme anymore, is it, Trav? I give Drinkwick credit. Brady Cook comes back. I don't have Schrader. I do have Luther Burden. So I would say anybody who's got to play Missouri and then another upper echelon team in the league, that's going to be a tough couple game stretch, is it not?
Yeah, that's a meat and potato stretch there from mid-September really through early November in that trip to LSU for Alabama.
Yes,
I wonder about Missouri. I have concerns about Missouri uh, in terms of sustaining the improvement on defense
agree.
with the changes to the staff there, departures, as we know, to LSU on that side of the ball. Can Corey Batoon come in and kind of maintain and even elevate the play on that side of the ball? Because as much as we talk about Brady Cook and Schrader and Burden and the offense last year, they made tremendous strides on the defensive side. So we'll get to Missouri coming up next week in this stretch. But yeah, I mean, the bye weeks work nicely for Alabama. And
Mhm.
you'll notice that with some other teams that we'll talk about as well. Alabama with a bye week between Wisconsin and Georgia, and then also the bye week between Missouri and LSU. What about Arkansas? It's easy to look to November and think about, well, what about Ole Miss in Fayetteville, followed by Texas in Fayetteville? Again, a bye week comes into play there because that'll separate, I believe, those two games. But for me anyway, Brent, when it comes to defining back-to-backs
Mm-hmm.
for Sam Pittman and perhaps even his ability to still be there in November, I look at late September with that road trip to Auburn and then the game against A&M in Arlington. And those two follow what could be a big game in Stillwater against Oklahoma State on September 7th.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, anytime A&M really affects Arkansas, because frankly, win or lose, if you've noticed the tradition of that game, they have, it takes them a couple of weeks to flush that mentally because that's such a big game for them. And then you've got a Auburn team that we don't quite know what to expect out of them, but having them early, I don't know if that's going to help Arkansas that much or not. But again, we've got Bobby Petrino. We think they've got better wide receivers. Sam Pittman said in the offseason they're working hard to solidify that line of scrimmage, and that's going to be important for them. So now I've seen some people give Arkansas like a ceiling of about 7-5, 6-6. So to go along with what you're saying, boy, oh boy, how important is the month of September for the Hogs?
Yeah, for me, it's the road game at Auburn and then the game at Jerry World against A&M. As you said, there's been some after effects involving that matchup with the Aggies. Certainly, if things go better than anticipated, then Ole Miss at home, Texas at home in November become very, very big as well. Auburn, let's talk about the Tigers. You've got a home game against Oklahoma fairly early in the season, and then you go to the University of Georgia. That's what catches me probably first and foremost. And then even after Georgia, you do get a bye, but then you go to Missouri, So that stretch of 3 games, you could kind of pick 2 from those 3, in my opinion, and probably be okay. You also have a 1-2 to cap the regular season with A&M and then on the road at Alabama.
A lot of folks haven't realized this for Auburn, but they've got their first, I believe, 3 games are home. And then, Trav, they have basically a gap. I don't know how you do this, frankly, and survive it, where they're on the road. I don't believe that they don't actually come back home. I mean, it's a gap like from late September to like almost mid-November of being on the road. That's going to be really hard for Auburn in order to do that. So they've got to make some hay early. But I'm with you. OU could really give that secondary for Auburn a lot of pressure in that situation. And then we know what Georgia's got at that point. And my thing would be, can Georgia stand the pounding they're going to get, or Auburn stand the pounding they're going to get from Georgia, and you lose 2 or 3 starters in that game, and that adds up as you go into October.
Yeah, and the anticipation you knew for year 2 under Hugh Freeze was going to be immense. We've heard and seen magical second season for so many places under anticipated new hires at the head coach position. So that's what Auburn fans are looking at right now. But I saw where DraftKings had sort of marquee odds and point spreads, early point spreads for SEC teams here in the last week. Of the 5 that DraftKings dropped for Auburn, Tigers underdogs in all 5 of those games.
Wow.
And in 3 of them, they're double-digit underdogs. So that isn't the sort of buzz I think a lot of Auburn fans were expecting going into year 2 of Hugh Freeze. Now, obviously things can happen on the field and change that pretty quickly. Florida. Yeah, boy, you talk about just the schedule in general. It's kind of like Burger King. Have it your way on this, when you want to try to pick these back-to-backs. But, I mean, Georgia and then at Texas. That's That's about as tough as it gets in all of college football, I got to think, Brent.
It
And then,
is.
you do get a bye week, but then you've got LSU, Ole Miss at Florida State in November.
Yeah.
So, again, take your pick, right?
Well, they know this is going to be tough, but I've seen a little bit more. I'm curious if you have too, from some of the national media who are giving them maybe a little bit more credit and thinking they can go 7-5, 8-4. I'm not sure about that, but I do think they can start well. I think they can start
Well, the
4-1.
Miami game is huge.
There's no
You
question
got to
about
win that
that.
game,
Yes, and it's huge for both of those
because
teams.
morale of that entire fan base
Yes,
will go in the dumper if
yeah,
you drop that one.
no, no question, absolutely. But to me, where they've got to improve is defensively, obviously, and that's going to be huge. Roberts coming over from Auburn, I think, is going to help them considerably. DJ Lagway, given some promise of the future, is going to be important for them. I still really like Graham Mertz, and I think Graham Mertz is one of the better quarterbacks, frankly, in the league. But I'm with you. I don't think there's any way they're able to survive Georgia and Texas, but that LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, see, that's going to be huge for them, Trav, because they may be on the verge of a bowl game late in the year and
Could be
need
5-2, maybe even
yeah,
6-1.
yeah. And can they get that win to get them over the hump?
Well, and is that enough? I mean,
Yeah,
is bowl
true.
eligibility enough for Billy Napier?
Right.
If
Yeah.
that's the finish of that stretch, I think 8 wins is where it needs to probably land for him in his future down there in Gainesville. But boy, back half of that schedule is just
It really
brutal for the
is.
Florida Gators. Let's talk about those Georgia Bulldogs. Looking at that schedule, road trip to Texas, bye week, Florida and Jacksonville certainly stands out. But you've also got Ole Miss and Tennessee on the road to Oxford. And then the Vols and Athens is a back-to-back to consider for the Dogs as well.
Yeah, yeah, that will be interesting to see. Now I've seen a lot of Carson Beck, maybe maybe not only win the Heisman, but win being the number one draft choice. We're not ready to go that far yet. I mean, if he plays well with that team, that certainly is also very possible. I'm intrigued, aren't you, by them going to Texas?
Absolutely.
And how that's going to be. What a boy! Can you imagine, Trev? What's the ticket man going to be able to do for that game?
Yeah, the ticket man's going to do all right.
He really,
He always does all right. He's got Florida coming to town too,
that's right.
So those fan bases are going to be very excited to make that trip. And that's when the ticket man really kicks in, when he gets that hungry visiting fan base, because that's something that's dissipated a little bit in the era of every game being televised. You don't have fan bases that travel as strongly as they did, but
No,
Florida and Georgia are definitely going to be excited about those trips to Austin.
well, and let me say this as a side note for our viewers and listeners is we're going to find out hopefully in the next few weeks about what is maybe going to happen with Florida, Georgia, Florida. Folks may forget we have a new stadium situation coming up here.
Stadium of the future.
That's right. So the question is going to be while that stadium is being built, where does that rivalry go? So that is as big of a question, Trav, as we've got around here as it is how are both those two teams in Florida and Georgia going to do this year?
Yeah. And oh, by the way, the Jags are going to have to figure out another place to
Yeah,
play too. But yeah, Florida, Georgia, no doubt a big part of that situation with the stadium scenarios there on the first coast. So we'll round things out this week with the University of Kentucky, and checking out the Wildcat schedule. I thought it was pretty favorable
yeah,
for Mark
really.
Stoops. There is a stretch of, I guess, Auburn and on the road at Tennessee, late October, early November, perhaps, that stood out. There's still tough games on that schedule. But in reference to what we're talking about, back-to-backs, sets up pretty well, I'd say, for the Wildcats.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. And their quarterback room is something that I'm very interested in. Obviously, Brock Vandagriff, we've never really seen enough of him to see what he can do, which I think is one of the reasons they did not stream their spring game. But look, they've got some guys. This Walker kid on the D line is one of the better ones, frankly, in the entire league. But I'm with you. This schedule is spread out enough with Kentucky that, I mean, could they do an 8-4, or if Vandagriff comes fruition, could they do a 9-3 this year? I wonder.
They could. Now, I also wanted to point out, at Texas on November the
Yeah.
23rd,
Yes.
and then Louisville in Lexington with the big rivalry game on the following weekend. That's a big 1-2 punch to watch for the Cats as well. But otherwise, seems to set up about as well as you could hope. Now, again, teams like Kentucky, you always worry about sustainability from a roster perspective. What will this team look like by the time it makes the trip to
You're
Austin
right.
on November the 23rd? Injuries, things like that come into play. But we'll talk about this too coming up a little bit in news and notes. Kentucky officially transfer portal U when it comes to the quarterback position. So there you go. Some back-to-backs for your consideration here on the program. And of course, we also always want to delve into that notebook of Brent Beaird's. He's got some great notes for us involving portal additions, perhaps around the SEC. And we'll start with the unfortunate passing of Cecil Hootie Ingram, former Alabama player, defensive back, administrator of note. And for me anyway, Brent, growing up in Northeast Florida, even before I realized that Hootie Ingram had played at Alabama, had been a nice player for the Crimson Tide back in the day, he was the athletic director at Florida State.
There was.
That was my foundational years kind of in
Yes.
college football. And that was my first memories of Hootie Ingram. But again, just wanted to send along our condolences on behalf of the program to the Ingrams and their friends.
And his funeral is in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. I think the thing I wanted to point out quickly with them was, I mean, starred Alabama. He coached under Vince Dooley at Georgia, went to Arkansas. People may forget, Trav, he was a head coach at Clemson.
Yeah.
Back in the early 70s. And then obviously spent the time with FSU and Alabama. The thing that I really want to horn in on here real quick for just a second is when he was at Florida State and Bobby Bowden was developing who Bobby Bowden became, they had a decision to make with were they going to the ACC or the SEC? Obviously, as Bobby Bowden explained later in his career, we decided to go with the ACC because we thought we'd win more championships and our basketball team would be better because it would be in the ACC. I'm not sure that really ever happened, but they certainly won the championships. So for the immediate, it worked. But Trev, I know you can appreciate this irony. Look, obviously, Hootie had moved on before a lot of this came to fruition. But my understanding was he had a real influence in what Florida State was going to be doing with Bobby Bowden. I've talked to people who know Hootie, and that's what he basically told them was it was about 60-40 Bowden and Hootie in that decision. But the thing that fascinates me about this is just appreciating the irony of the fact that they got into the ACC. during that time because I thought it would help them. And Trev, now they're doing everything they can to get out of the
Yeah.
ACC and go either to the Big Ten or the SEC.
Yeah, Hootie Ingram and Bobby Bowden always sort of tethered for me.
Yes.
Again, in terms of my formative years as a college football fan, that's the connection that I relate to the most. And again, some irony there because Bowden, it looked at one point in that stretch,
Yep.
might be headed to Alabama
It sure was.
as the
Yes.
head coach. Florida State was able to weather that situation. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. Brent, what else in that notebook of yours can you dig out for us as it relates to, say, some personnel additions maybe around the Southeastern Conference and some other good stuff we might need to know about?
I know this is almost funny, but I want to make a point out of it. Snoop Dogg now has decided he wants to get into the bowl business and certainly has lent his name with a bowl in Arizona that was previously with Barstool. But this kind of came up this week on a couple of podcasts. Trav, could this be a little bit of the future? Could we see more? I know Jimmy Kimmel lent his name to one. Now you've got Snoop Dogg. Could this be something that we see that for some of these bowls, they may look at celebrities as maybe saving them to some degree or creating a real niche somewhere? I know people kind of just snickered at this a little bit, but I'm just wondering and digging a little bit deeper could this be a little bit of the future for bowl games?
Yeah, it's all marketing, and
Absolutely it
whatever can
is.
help in that regard. And you also have some ties between like Jimmy Kimmel and ABC and ESPN. So there's some cross branding that's going on in some instances to perhaps two birds with one stone, some situations. So, yeah, but it's still very interesting, no doubt about it. And hey, we need a second helping bowl at this point. Why
I
not?
like that.
I mean, the
I like
second
that
helping
immensely.
bowl should be like Montgomery, probably, or
Yeah,
something, maybe New Orleans.
absolutely.
Second helping in New Orleans. I
Yeah.
always think about a second helping when I'm in New Orleans. So yeah, it's part of something that I don't think's going away anytime soon. What else you got for us, Brent?
I'm curious your take on this. Shane Beamer's named Lenore Sellers as a starting quarterback coming out of spring. Now, we don't see that often, do we, Trav, where they name a starter coming out of spring, and that basically is all it means. I'm sure he'll ramp up the quarterback competition talk probably in late July or media days. But look, I mean, they've got Robbie Ashford as a backup who is okay. He's got SEC experience, but he's not going to light up the scoreboard by any stretch of the imagination. I've just talked to some folks this week that they're concerned about this team, really, and they need a real some kind of momentum coming out of that offense. Trav, I still don't think they've got anywhere near the weapons they need on the outside. At this point, Xavier Leggett, for instance, goes to the NFL. Antoine Wells at Ole Miss. So getting any kind of production out of this quarterback situation, and especially tucking the ball and running on the ground, is going to be paramount for them.
Yeah, and I don't think Rocket Sanders is George Rogers 2.0.
Yeah,
So that might be a stretch if you're thinking you're going to get that type of production out of your run game with Rocket. Um, I guess one way to look at this is you got to name somebody. And if
yeah,
it's
yeah.
apparent right now that Sellers is the best of what you got, perhaps by going ahead and hitching your wagon to him publicly, that helps him to continue to gain confidence and feel like he's the guy, which in turn helps him from a leadership perspective in these upcoming months when you're really counting on your quarterback or quarterbacks to run a lot of the things for you. Now, we got support staff, strength and conditioning staffs now being what they are. It's essentially coached throughout
Oh,
the
yeah.
summer. It's not what
Right.
it was 15 years ago when it was really on quarterbacks to organize voluntary workouts and those type of things. But that's sort of the angle I'm taking with this, is that Sellers is the best of what they've got. He knows that. Go ahead and infuse this guy with some sense of ownership, some confidence, and maybe that'll help you get as much as you possibly can out of that position in 2024. What else, Brent?
Yeah, and look, I'll dovetail that with this. I've got a lot more confidence out of this A&M quarterback situation. This was talked about this week with Connor Weedman coming back. Also, now you pointed out, and rightfully so, Jalen Henderson at times last year looked like a star, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So that with Mike Elko in this team, I mean, look, can they get past this 8-4 ceiling that they had over the last few years? Lately, more with Jimbo and Trev. They've got an early fascinating game with Notre Dame that no one's talked about at home. I'm intrigued a little bit with this A&M team.
Oh, absolutely. And I like that dynamic of Weigman and Henderson, because Henderson can give you something different from Weigman. Weigman is the classic sort of pocket guy. You can do some things. You can package some stuff for Jalen Henderson, to get him involved with his legs and his dual threat ability if it comes down to it. Anything else, Brent?
Yeah, just real quick, Trav, I've seen a lot of folks think that they think Texas can go undefeated. I mean, you've got a big game.
The home games line up.
It does. You got a big game at Michigan, who's replacing a lot of people. I mean, that will be a helmet game, to say the least. Obviously,
Texas. I need to check. I'm sure DraftKings had this line. I would surprise me if Texas is a road favorite in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, well, they very well may be. Yeah, that's a great point. Now you got to replace Sweat on that defensive line. But see, I think this was where Sark has done and doing a good job. Trav, he said we've got to rebuild our line of scrimmage, and I think he's holding up to that promise. It's slowly but surely, because they could be much better this year on the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I think Sark definitely gets that, no doubt about it. And again, we've talked about the departure of Bo Davis, so that's a concern. But yeah, Texas a 3-point favorite right now, according to DraftKings, at Michigan early in the season. So there you go. Again, you get Georgia at home.
That's right.
You don't see Alabama, so not all that unrealistic to think that Sark and the Horns have a chance to run the table before perhaps a first ever appearance in a Southeastern Conference championship game. How about that?
That'd be amazing. Trav, before we go, we need a pumps report and update us on kind of where you see the pro golf tour.
The pro golf on the cable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Going to be spending a lot of time with Pops this weekend. Our niece, Bailey Reier, is graduating from the School of Pharmacy at the University of Florida. So we're going down to Gainesville on Saturday to celebrate Bailey on her
very nice achievement.
So Pops will be in attendance there. And then, of course, Mother's Day coming up on Sunday. Which, we've tried to organize that thing where Nana has a good day. We'll see how Pops comes through with the gifting. He's been less than average, we'll say, in the past in that regard. So hopefully that involves more than the bag of Skittles that he's given her in the past. So we'll see with Pops. It's always TBD, to be determined with Pops.
That's right.
And pro golf, you've got the Wells Fargo event. You got two events on the PGA Tour this week, but the Wells Fargo is the primary event. So you got a lot of star power there in the Charlotte, North Carolina era. You had the first round on Thursday. Xander Schauffele, Rory McIlroy right at the top of that leaderboard, which the PGA Tour desperately needs to be the case with everything else that's going on in pro golf these days. So got our eyes on that, but a lot of college football that we're still previewing and looking ahead to, and we always enjoy doing that with my great friend Brent Beaird right here on Second Helping. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, at Grateful Sports Food Travel, please take the time right now, hit that subscribe button, Give us a like if you don't mind. Turn on those notifications. You'll get this show and others as they drop at Grateful Sports Food Travel. Brent, look forward to doing it again next week.
Me too, bud. Always enjoy it. And listen, we're going to be at SEC Media Days, Trav, after we get those magazines, of course.
It's rapidly on the immediate horizon, no doubt about that. So for Brent Beaird, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us right here on Second Helping. And until next time, so long, everybody.